Something pulled the Søkongen under the ice on March 9th, 1903. Not the ice itself. The hull damage was wrong for that. Ice crush leaves angular fractures, splintered planking, compression marks that follow the geometry of flow collision, straight lines, flat planes, the brute physics of frozen water bearing down on wood and iron. The damage recorded in the salvage survey conducted 8 months later on the fragments that had refrozen into the surface showed something different. Curved impressions, deep rings pressed into the hull copper, each one roughly 14 inches in diameter, arranged in parallel rows. Radial scarring around each ring, consistent with enormous suction force applied and then released. The surveyor, a naval engineer named Falk, noted the marks in his report with clinical precision and no interpretation. He catalogued 47 individual impressions on the recovered hull sections alone. He estimated that the submerged portions, which could not be recovered, would contain several hundred more. The crew of the Søkongen called it a sea devil. The Inuit of the Itakortormiut settlement had an older name, Umjarsualuk, the one that takes boats. The Danish Admiralty called it nothing. They sealed the survivor testimony, classified the salvage photographs, attributed the loss of the Søkongen to catastrophic ice pressure during an unexpected flow convergence, and closed the file. For 100 years, the official record held. The Søkongen was crushed by ice. 8 men died, 6 survived. A tragedy, but not an unusual one, for the era. Ships were lost in the Arctic with grim regularity. The ice was explanation enough. But here is what the Admiralty did not seal well enough. The testimony of 12 men who stood on the ice and watched their ship disappear into a hole that should not have existed, pulled down by a living thing that should not have been real, in water that should not have been open, with a speed and violence that no ice event could replicate. 12 men stood on that ice in the dark, holding lanterns and watching the mast go under. They heard the ship's timbers screaming. They saw tentacles gray-white, thick as mainmasts, ridged with suckers the size of dinner plates, wrapped around the hull and dragging. They saw eyes, 2 of them, yellow, the size of carriage wheels, looking up from the black water with what 3 separate witnesses described independently as awareness. 12 men stood on that ice. 8 days later, 8 reached the Danish outpost at Itakortormiut. The creature killed 2 men during the attack. The captain, Mikkelsen, pulled from the bridge rail by a tentacle, and the stoker, Dahl, who went down with the engine room when the hull split. 2 deaths in 4 minutes. The sea did its worst, and its worst was 2. The ice killed none. Weather records for the region show that the week following the attack was unusually clear cold, yes, brutally cold. But no storms, no whiteouts, no crevasse collapses. The ice was stable. The conditions were survivable. 12 minus 2 is 10. 10 men on the ice, walking south. 8 arrived. So what killed the other 2? The Admiralty knows. They've known since the court-martial they convened in June 1903 and sealed before the ink dried. They knew when they changed the survivor count from 8 to 6. They knew when they removed 2 names from the expedition manifest entirely not listed as deceased, not noted as missing, but deleted, as if they had never existed, never sailed, never stood on that ice holding a lantern while something out of the deep dark pulled their world under. I have spent the last 3 years in the archives. I have the ship's log. I have the salvage survey. I have 3 independent survivor accounts. I have the sealed court-martial transcript, declassified in 2003 under the 100-year rule. I have a chaplain's letter that was never meant to be read, and I have a coat folded in a cedar trunk for 54 years, with a letter in the breast pocket that was written, addressed, and never sent. The creature that took the Søkongen was real. I believe that now. The evidence is too consistent, too corroborated, too physically specific to be invention or delusion. But the creature is not the story. The creature was 4 minutes. What happened after was 8 days, and what happened after was worse. The Søkongen was a steam auxiliary icebreaker, 187 feet, iron-hulled with copper sheathing, built in the Burmeister and Wain yards in Copenhagen in 1894. She was designed for Arctic survey work, reinforced bow, shallow draft, triple expansion steam engine for forcing through pack ice, with a full sailing rig for open water. By 1903, she had completed 2 previous Greenland voyages without significant incident. She was not a famous ship, but she was a competent one, and the men who sailed her knew what they were doing. The crew manifest lists 14 men. Captain Anders Mikkelsen, age 51. 28 years in the Danish merchant marine, 6 Arctic voyages. A quiet man by reputation, respected more than liked. His personnel file contains a single personal note written by a former first officer. Mikkelsen does not raise his voice. He does not need to. When Mikkelsen is concerned, you see it in his hands. He folds them behind his back and holds them still. When his hands are behind his back, listen carefully to what he says next. First mate, Lars Engström, age 34. Competent, ambitious. The author of the ship's log from March 6th onward, when Mikkelsen delegated the duty during a bout of snow blindness. Dr. Henrik Lindgren, age 41. The expedition naturalist, University of Uppsala. Published in Marine Biology. Described by a colleague as pathologically curious, the kind of man who picks up a dead thing on the beach and smells it before he examines it. Ship's chaplain, Søren Vestergaard, age 38, a Lutheran minister assigned to the expedition by the Danish Missionary Society. A gentle, unremarkable man who wrote meticulous letters to his wife every Sunday and whose neat handwriting would, 4 months after the expedition, produce the most disturbing document in the entire archive. The remaining 10 were working sailors, engineers, and specialists. I'll name them all because someone should. Peter Brandt, age 29. Bosun, from a farming family in Jutland. Strong, methodical, and by all accounts, well-liked. He had a habit of whistling while he worked old hymns mostly, and he kept a pouch of seeds in his sea chest. Flower seeds. Wild flower seeds from the meadow behind his family's farmhouse. He told the chaplain once that he carried them for luck, though he couldn't have planted them anywhere the Søkongen was going. Jens Fisker, age 33. Gunner and ice master. The oldest hand aboard after the captain. A hard man with a practical reputation. His previous captain described him as reliable in a crisis, uncomfortable in a calm. Fisker had served on 3 prior Arctic expeditions and had been involved in 2 emergency evacuations. He knew what the ice could do. Niels Holm, age 26, carpenter's mate. The youngest man aboard, except for the cabin boy. Holm was on his first Arctic voyage, a last-minute replacement for a man who'd broken his wrist in a dockside fall. He was not supposed to be on this expedition. He was not supposed to be anywhere near Greenland. In the manifest notes, someone, possibly Engström, wrote beside Holm's name, "Green but willing, good with his hands." Good with his hands. I keep coming back to that. There is one small moment in the surviving record that I need to mention now, because it will matter later. It comes from the chaplain's weekly letter to his wife, dated February 28, 1903. 9 days before the attack, Vestergaard describes the crew in passing. A snapshot of shipboard life. Brandt and the young carpenter Holm have struck up an odd friendship, Brandt being taciturn and Holm being anything but. I watched them yesterday on the foredeck. Holm was struggling to reseat a frozen fitting on the bowsprit rail, his fingers too cold to grip the wrench. Brandt stood beside him for a full minute, watching, saying nothing. Then he took off his own gloves, handed them to Holm, and held the fitting steady with his bare hands while Holm worked. When it was done, Holm tried to return the gloves. Brandt told him to keep them until his own dried out. "I've been cold before," he said. "You have not. It was a small kindness. And I note it only because small kindnesses are what make a ship bearable. I read that passage 11 times. You'll understand why. Now, the manifest lists the crew. It also lists the equipment. And this is where the first wrongness begins, not with the creature, not with the ice, but with the cargo hold. The Søkongen was tasked with a hydrographic survey of the Scoresby Sund Strait system, a mapping expedition, depth soundings, ice thickness measurements, coastal charting, standard work. The equipment for this kind of survey is well documented. Lead lines, sounding machines, theodolites, chronometers, chart paper. The Søkongen carried all of that. She also carried a Thomson steam-driven ice drill, capable of boring through 6 feet of ice in under 20 minutes. She carried a set of deep-water specimen dredges rated to 2,000 fathoms. She carried 40 glass specimen jars packed in sawdust. She carried a portable winch rated for loads far exceeding anything a hydrographic survey would require. And she carried, according to a supply requisition I found in a separate archive in Copenhagen, 200 pounds of formaldehyde solution. You do not bring formaldehyde on a mapping expedition. You do not bring deep water specimen dredges on a mapping expedition. You do not bring a steam drill and a heavy winch on a mapping expedition. The Søkongen was not sent to map the Scoresby Sund. She was sent to find something in it, something biological, something they expected to be large enough to require a winch, deep enough to require a 2,000-fathom dredge, and dead enough or killable enough to require 40 specimen jars and 200 pounds of preservative. The official mission brief makes no mention of any of this. The equipment is listed on the manifest, but not in the mission orders. Someone approved the cargo. Someone funded it. Someone knew what they were looking for. And they sent 14 men to find it. The Søkongen departed Copenhagen on January 14, 1903, and reached the eastern Greenland coast on February 19th after a crossing that the log describes as uneventful, if brutal. Ice conditions in the Scoresby Sund were worse than expected. The strait was choked with pack ice driven south by early-season currents, and Mikkelsen spent the first week navigating cautiously through leads and polynyas, looking for a route to the survey area in the deep inner fjords. On February 27th, they found one. A wide lid opened in the pack, running northwest into the strait, and Mikkelsen ordered full steam. The Søkongen pushed through, her reinforced bow cracking the thinner ice aside, her engine shaking the entire ship with a rhythmic, mechanical heartbeat that carried through the hull and into the water. The ship's log for the next 5 days is routine. Ice observations, temperature readings, course corrections, depth soundings, and it's here, buried in the numbers, that the first anomaly appears. On March 1st, the sounding line returned a depth of 340 fathoms, roughly 2,000 feet. This was consistent with known charts of the Scoresby Sund. On March 2nd, at a position less than 4 miles further northwest, the sounding returned no bottom at 600 fathoms. The line ran out. Engström noted this in the log with a single annotation: anomalous. Possible current deflection of the sounding weight. It wasn't current deflection. Modern bathymetric surveys of the Scoresby Sund, conducted in the 1990s using multi-beam sonar, confirmed the existence of a narrow subglacial trench in almost exactly the position the Søkongen occupied on March 2nd. The trench descends to over 4,800 feet, nearly a mile of water beneath the ice. It is not on any chart from 1903. It is barely on charts now. It is a crack in the continental shelf, a sliver of deep ocean hidden beneath the ice. And it is precisely the kind of feature you would need a 2,000-fathom dredge to sample. Someone knew the trench was there before the expedition sailed. On the night of March 2nd, the same night as the anomalous depth sounding, the knocking began. Engström's log, March 3rd. Crew reports intermittent percussion against the lower hull, audible from the forward berths. Investigated with Fisker. No visible ice contact. Sound is rhythmic, 3 distinct impacts. Pause, 3 impacts, pause. Interval approximately 15 seconds. Continued for 2 hours, then ceased. Origin unknown. Fisker suggests calving ice striking the keel from below. Possible. 3 knocks, pause. 3 knocks, pause. The chaplain's letter to his wife, dated March 3rd, describes the same sound differently. A strange tapping beneath us last night. Not like ice too regular, too deliberate, like a man knocking on a door. 3 times, then waiting. 3 times, then waiting. Several of the men are unsettled. Holm, the young carpenter, pressed his ear to the deck and said it sounded like it was listening between the knocks. I told him not to be fanciful, but I confess I did not sleep well. Like it was listening between the knocks. The knocking returned on March 4th and March 5th. Each night, the same pattern, 3 percussive impacts against the lower hull, a pause of 10 to 15 seconds, then 3 more. Always beginning after midnight, always ceasing before dawn. Engstrom logged it each time with diminishing annotation, as if repetition made it routine. Knocking resumed, 130, ceased 340. Then, knocking, same pattern. Then, on March 5th, simply, again. On March 5th, something changed. Dr. Lindgren, the naturalist, made a formal request to the captain. I found it in a separate file, a handwritten note on university letterhead that Lindgren must have carried aboard. Captain Mikkelsen, I request permission to lower the specimen dredge to depth and to activate the Thomson drill to take a core sample at our current position. The depth anomaly and the acoustic phenomena are consistent with the presence of a large marine organism beneath the ship. I believe we may have located the survey target. I urge prompt action before the organism relocates. The survey target. There it is. In Lindgren's own handwriting. They were looking for it. Whatever was beneath the Søkongen, the expedition had been sent to find it. Lindgren knew. Mikkelsen presumably knew. The question is whether anyone else aboard understood what they were anchored above. Mikkelsen's response is not preserved. But Engstrom's log for March 5th contains an entry that has been partially redacted. Someone, at some point, drew heavy ink lines through several sentences. What remains readable is this. Dr. Lindgren's request, redacted. Captain has ordered, redacted. The drill will not be deployed until redacted. Confirms safe conditions. Interpreter Jorund has expressed, redacted, regarding our current position and recommends we, redacted, immediately. Interpreter Jorund. I almost missed him. He's on the manifest as Jorund Ikualak, Greenlandic interpreter and ice pilot. Contracted Itokutormit, a local man. Hired to guide the ship through coastal ice and to translate in the event of contact with Inuit hunting parties. Jorund knew what the knocking was. His objection, whatever it said, was redacted from the log. His recommendation, immediately, is the only word that survived the ink, was not followed. The Søkongen remained at anchor over the trench. I contacted a cultural historian at the University of Greenland in Nuuk and asked about the Inuit oral traditions of the Scoresby Sund region. She sent me a recording made in 1971. An elder from Itokortuormiit named Amos Kanguk, speaking in Kalaallisut, describing a tradition passed down from his grandmother. When the Umiarsualuk knows you are above it, it tests the bottom of your boat. 3 times it touches. 3 times it waits. If you leave after the first night, it lets you go. After the second night, it follows you, but slowly. After the third night, it is decided. By the 4th night, you cannot leave. The old people say, if you hear the knocking, count the nights. 1 night is curiosity. 2 nights is interest. 3 nights is study. 4 nights is hunger. The Søkongen heard the knocking for 4 nights. On the night of March 5th, the 3rd night, the knocking stopped at 0200, earlier than usual. Engstrom's log notes. Knocking ceased early. Quiet. a relief. Then a separate entry, timed 03:15. Doctor, Lindgren woke me to report a new sound. Not knocking. A scraping along the full length of the keel, bow to stern. Duration approximately 45 seconds. Single event. Did not recur. Lindgren, visibly shaken, says it was measuring the ship. The fourth night was March 6th. The Søkongen deployed the Thompson drill at 0900 on March 6th. The log records this as a routine operation. Ice core sampling for thickness survey. But Lindgren's specimen jars were laid out on the deck, and the winch was rigged over the drill hole. They weren't taking ice cores. They were opening a hole through 6 feet of ice, directly above a mile-deep trench, where something had been knocking on their hull for 3 nights. The drill punched through at 0940. Steam vented. The ice groaned. The hole opened roughly 18 inches in diameter, and black water welled up to the surface. Engstrom's log. Drill through. Open water below. Lindgren deploying specimen dredge. Depth initial reading. 80 fathoms and descending. Weight still falling. 200 fathoms, 400 fathoms. Line still paying out. Lindgren's dredge went down into the trench, into the domain of whatever had been testing the hull. On the night of March 6th, the fourth night, there was no knocking. There was nothing. The silence, Engstrom wrote, was worse. On March 7th and 8th, Lindgren continued his sampling. The dredge brought up sediment, microfauna, and according to a single line in Lindgren's field notes, recovered separately from the ship's log. A tissue fragment, origin unknown, approximately 30 centimeters in length, consistent with cephalopod integument. Coloration gray-white. Texture firm, elastic. Preserved in formaldehyde jar number 7. They had found what they came for. A piece of it, at least. A piece of skin. Proof. On the night of March 8th, the ice around the Søkongen began to crack. Not from wind, not from current. The fractures radiated outward from the ship in a pattern that Fisker, the ice master, described in his later testimony as deliberate like fingers opening. Engstrom's final log entry, March 9th, 0547. Hull breach forward, water in the bow, something has the ship. Mikkelsen is ordering. The entry ends there. The next voice in the log is the first mate's, written hours later on the ice, in pencil, with a hand that pressed so hard the graphite tore the paper. Captain Mikkelsen is in the water. The ship is going down bow first. God help us. Something has the hull. There are 3 surviving eyewitness accounts of what happened at 0547 on the morning of March 9th, 1903. I have cross-referenced all 3. Where they agree, I report the consensus. Where they diverge, I note the divergence. But on the essential facts, the creature, its size, its behavior, and the destruction of the Søkongen, they do not diverge at all. The first account is Engstrom's, written in the ship's log on the ice later that morning, terse and operational. The second is the chaplain Vestergaard's, from a letter to his wife composed 4 days later during the march. The third is Fisker's court-martial testimony, given under oath in Copenhagen in June 1903. This is what they describe. At approximately 0545, the crew was awakened by a sound that Fisker calls a detonation beneath the waterline. Not an explosion, but a tearing, as if the hull plates were being peeled back. Vestergaard describes a groan from the ship herself, a sound I have never heard metal make like a living thing in pain. Engstrom, more precisely. Catastrophic hull failure, forward port quarter, immediate flooding of the forward compartments. The men scrambled from their berths. The ship was already listing to port. The ice around the vessel had fractured in a wide ring. Open water was visible on all sides, black and steaming in the Arctic air. The Søkongen was no longer sitting on solid ice. She was floating in a pool of open sea that had not existed 5 minutes earlier. Vestergaard reached the main deck first and looked over the port rail. His account. I saw the arms first. That is what I must call them, arms, though the word is insufficient. They were wrapped around the hull below the waterline, visible through the gap between the ice edge and the ship's side. Gray-white, immense, each one as thick as the mainmast at its base. I could see the suckers' great circular mouths, pulsing, gripping the copper sheathing so tightly that the metal buckled inward around each one. I counted 4 arms on the port side alone. There were more beneath. The ship was being pulled down. Fisker's testimony. It had the bow. The forward third of the ship was already below the waterline when I reached the deck. The stern was rising. I could feel the angle increasing under my feet. 10 degrees, then 20. I looked forward and saw the tentacles over the bow rail. 2 of them, reaching across the foredeck like a man reaching across a table. One of them found the Thompson drill and tore it from its mounting. The bolts sheared. 800 pounds of steel, gone. The other arm swept the deck and took the winch, the cable drums, the specimen crates. It was I struggle with this. It was systematic. It was taking the equipment. It was taking the equipment. All 3 accounts confirm what happened next. The creature pulled the bow down sharply, the stern rose nearly 45 degrees, and in the convulsion of the ship's final plunge, 2 things happened simultaneously. Captain Mickelson, who had been on the bridge attempting to organize the evacuation, was thrown against the forward rail, and a tentacle moving with what Engstrom calls horrible precision took him over the side. Engstrom saw it. The arm wrapped his torso once and pulled. He did not scream. I do not think he had time. He was there, and then he was in the water, and then he was not. Below, in the engine room, the stoker Hans Dahl was trapped when the hull plates collapsed inward. The flooding was instantaneous. He did not reach the deck. 2 men dead, Mickelson and Dahl, both killed by the creature. The remaining 12 made it onto the ice. The evacuation was chaotic, but not hopeless. The ice shelf surrounding the open water pool was solid thick, stable pack ice extending in every direction. As the ship went down, the men scrambled over the stern rail and jumped to the ice edge, a gap of perhaps 8 to 10 feet. Some jumped cleanly. Some fell short and had to be hauled from the water. One of those was Holm. Brandt pulled him out. Fisker's testimony contains this detail, offered without emphasis. The carpenter Holm went into the water during the evacuation. He surfaced between the ice edge and the sinking hull, in the shadow of the thing that was taking the ship. Brandt went to his belly on the ice, reached down with both arms, and pulled Holm out by his coat collar. The creature was less than 20 feet away. One arm was on the surface, sliding across the ice, feeling the edge. Brandt did not look at it. He looked at Holm and pulled. And here I must describe the creature itself, because the accounts for all their horror contain a remarkable degree of observational consistency, and because what they describe is not fantasy, it is biology. Terrible, impossible, ancient biology, but biology nonetheless. The body was cephalopod, an octopus, enormous but structurally recognizable. Vestergaard estimated the mantle, the bulbous central body, at 30 feet or more in height above the waterline, meaning the total body, including the submerged portion, could have been twice that. Fisker estimated the arm span at no less than 200 feet, possibly more. I could not see the tips. Engstrom did not estimate size. He wrote, "It was larger than the ship. The skin was gray-white, mottled, textured like stone. Vestergaard says, like wet granite. The suckers were rimmed with what Fisker describes as a chitinous edge, sharp enough to gouge the copper plating. The eyes, and all 3 men describe the eyes, were set on either side of the mantle, each one roughly 4 feet in diameter, yellow gold, with a horizontal pupil. Vestergaard. It looked at us. I was on the ice, 30 feet from the water's edge, and it raised its head, the great dome of its body, above the surface, and it looked at us. Not at the ship, at us, at the men on the ice. Its eyes moved. They tracked. I felt, and I know this is not science. I know this is a chaplain speaking, and not a naturalist. I felt that it was deciding. The ship went under in approximately 4 minutes. The sounds were terrible. The shriek of tearing metal, the percussive collapse of bulkheads, the deep gurgling of air escaping the hull. The creature rode the ship down, its arms contracting around the structure, pulling with a force that made the surrounding ice tremble. The mast was the last thing visible. Engström watched it descend, the rigging still intact, the Danish flag still flying at the masthead, sinking straight down into black water until the flag touched the surface and was gone. Then silence. The open water pool churned for perhaps 30 seconds. Dark shapes moved beneath the surface, the arms rearranging, the body settling. Then the creature descended. The pool stilled. The ice groaned and began to close, new ice forming at the edges, the sea reclaiming the wound. 12 men stood on the ice in the pale gray light of an Arctic morning, surrounded by the scattered debris of their evacuation. A few crates, some blankets, the lanterns they had grabbed. A single rifle, a canvas bag of ship's biscuit that someone had thrown from the galley. They were 60 miles from the nearest outpost. The temperature was minus 22 degrees. They had no shelter, no stove, no navigation instruments except Engström's pocket compass, and perhaps 4 days' worth of food if rationed carefully. They stood there. The creature did not return. And this is what I need you to understand, the detail that changes everything. The detail that separates this from a simple monster story and begins the real horror. The creature could have killed them all, easily. They were standing on ice above water it controlled. Its arms had reached the surface, had slid across the ice edge, had felt the men's footprints. It knew they were there. It had looked at them. It did not pursue. It took the ship. It took the equipment, the drill, the winch, the specimen jars, the dredge. It killed the captain and the stoker, both of whom were physically connected to the ship's machinery at the moment of their deaths. Mikkelsen on the bridge above the engine. Dahl in the engine room itself. The men who ran the machines. The 12 who stood on the ice were no longer a threat. They had no drill, no winch, no ship, no way to reach the trench. The creature took what it came for, and it let the rest go. 12 men on the ice. Alive. For now. The walk began within the hour. Engström, now the ranking officer, made the decision quickly and correctly. They could not stay at the wreck site. The ice was unstable where the creature had fractured it. The open water pool was refreezing but unpredictable. And they had no shelter. The outpost at Itokortormiet was approximately 60 miles to the southeast. In good conditions, on solid ice, a healthy man could cover 8 to 10 miles a day. They had, Engström estimated, 7 to 8 days of walking. They had 4 days of food. The group's condition was uneven. 10 men were physically sound, cold, shaken, terrified, but able to walk. 2 were not. Holm, the carpenter's mate, the man Brandt had pulled from the water, had been immersed in sub-zero seawater for approximately 90 seconds during the evacuation. His left hand and both feet had begun to show frostbite within hours. By the end of the first day's march, the frostbite had progressed to his ankles. He could walk, but slowly, and with what Vestergaard described as evident agony that he attempted to conceal and could not. The second injured man was the ship's cook, Anders Nyberg, age 44. During the evacuation, a falling spar had struck his right leg. The fracture was not compound, but the limb was useless. Fisker and Brandt fashioned a crude splint from salvaged wood, and Nyberg was supported between 2 men as they walked. His pace was less than half the group's natural speed. On March 9th, day 1, the group covered approximately 4 miles. On March 10th day, 2 they covered 3. Nyberg's pain was worse. Holm's frostbite had blackened his left hand to the wrist. On March 11th, day 3, They covered 2.5 miles. Food was rationed to half portions. Engstrom calculated their position and their remaining supplies and said nothing. But Fisker did the same calculation independently and said it aloud. At this pace, we will run out of food on day 6. We will reach the outpost on day 11, if we reach it at all. The official report, the one filed at Ida Kortormite and forwarded to Copenhagen, describes the march in brief, clinical terms. The surviving crew proceeded southeast over stable pack ice toward the outpost. Conditions were severe. 2 men, weakened by injuries sustained during the vessel's loss, succumbed to exposure on the 4th and 5th days respectively. Their bodies were committed to the ice with appropriate prayers. The remaining party reached the outpost on March 17th. Succumbed to exposure. Committed to the ice with appropriate prayers. That is the official story. Now let me show you what actually happened. I have 3 private accounts of the march. The first is a letter from Engstrom to his brother, written in 1907, 4 years after the expedition, in which Engstrom says only, "I will not speak of the walk. I will say that we did things on the ice that I cannot justify and cannot condemn and cannot forget. Do not ask me again." The second is a diary entry by a sailor named Lundgren, written in 1919, discovered by his daughter after his death. "I dream about night 4 every month. I did not participate. I did not stop it. I don't know which is worse." The third, and most detailed, is the chaplain's letter, not the one to his wife, but a separate document, sealed in the parish archives of the home and church in Copenhagen, addressed to no one, dated August 1903, with a note on the envelope in Vestergaard's hand. "My testimony before God, to be opened only after my death." It was opened in 1908, when Vestergaard died of pneumonia. It was read by the parish rector. The rector resealed it. It remained sealed until 2003. The chaplain's letter describes night 4. I will tell you what it says. I will not paraphrase, because paraphrase would soften it, and it should not be softened. These are Vestergaard's words, and they have waited 100 years to be heard. On the 4th night, we made camp in the lee of a pressure ridge. The injured men, Holm and Nyberg, were placed together in the single canvas shelter we had salvaged. They were suffering grievously. Holm's hand had gone black to the wrist, and the smell was beginning. Nyberg could no longer bear weight at all, and had been dragged on an improvised sledge for the last mile, screaming with each jolt. Neither man would survive the walk. I knew this. Every man knew this. After the evening meal, a quarter ration of biscuit and a mouthful of water from melted ice, Fisker called 5 of us aside. Not all of us. Not Engstrom, who was tending to Holm. Not Lundgren or Pedersen, who were on watch. Fisker spoke quietly and without emotion. He said, "They will not make it. We know this. Every day they slow us costs the rest of us a day we do not have. If we continue at this pace, we will all die. If we leave them, they die alone, which is worse than what I'm proposing. If we do what must be done, tonight, while they are asleep and in to no pain, 8 men live instead of 10 men dying." Brandt stood beside Fisker. He said nothing during Fisker's speech. When Fisker finished, Brandt said only, "I will do it. I don't ask anyone else to help, but I need no one to stop me. I should have spoken. I am a man of God. I should have said that what they proposed was murder, that we do not calculate the worth of a life against the convenience of the living, that suffering is not justification for killing. I should have said these things. I said nothing." No one said anything? Fisker nodded. Brandt went into the shelter. The chaplain's letter continues. I need to include this next passage, because it is the part that makes me unable to sleep. I stood outside the shelter. I could hear Holm breathing shallow, ragged breaths, the breath of a man in deep sleep and deep pain. I heard Brandt move inside. Then I heard the breathing change, a muffled sound, a brief movement, very brief, then quiet. Then the same sounds again, further away in the shelter, where Nyberg lay. I timed it by my own heartbeat. Holm took perhaps 2 minutes. Nyberg less. Brandt emerged. His face was, I cannot describe his face. It was the face of a man who had left something inside that shelter that he would never get back. He looked at Fisker. He looked at me. He said, "It's done." He walked to the edge of the camp and sat in the snow alone with his back to us and did not move for the rest of the night. In the morning, Fisker told Engström that both men had died in their sleep of exposure. Engström looked at the bodies. He looked at Fisker. He looked at Brandt, who was still sitting in the snow, staring east. Engström said nothing. He helped wrap the bodies in the canvas shelter, and they were left on the ice. We did not pray over them. This is my greatest shame. We were not short of time that morning. We did not pray because praying would have meant acknowledging what had happened. And no one, not even I, their chaplain, their minister, the man whose sole purpose aboard that expedition was to tend their souls, could bear to name it. We walked on. We moved faster. 10 men on the ice after night 4 became 8. 8 men with a full share of remaining rations, instead of a fractional share split 10 ways. 8 men unburdened by the injured. 8 men who could walk at full pace. They reached the outpost on March 17th. 8 days, 60 miles. 2 dead in the water, 2 dead on the ice. The official report says 6 survivors, because what the chaplain's letter tells you is that 2 men were killed. And what the court-martial transcript tells you, which I'll come to, is that the Admiralty decided the cleanest solution was not to prosecute the killers, not to investigate the silence, not to acknowledge the victims, but to make the victims disappear entirely, to reduce the count from 8 to 6, to erase Holm and Nyberg from the expedition record, to make the crime impossible by making the victims fictional. But here is the twist in the chaplain's letter. The detail that I missed on my first reading and caught on my fourth. The detail that changes the moral calculus of the entire event and makes it something worse than mercy killing, worse than triage, worse than desperate men making an impossible choice. Vestergaard writes, near the end of his account, "I have thought often about Fisker's words and the logic they contained. I believed at the time that his reasoning was sound, if his methods were damnable. The injured could not survive. We would all die if we continued at their pace. The mathematics of it were plain. But I have since reflected on a thing I did not consider in the moment. Nyberg and Holm were not the most gravely injured men on that march. Lindgren, the naturalist, had cracked 2 ribs during the evacuation and was breathing with great difficulty. His pace was nearly as slow as Holm's. And Franzen, the able seaman, had a deep laceration on his thigh that had begun to suppurate by day 3. Neither Lindgren nor Franzen was touched. Fisker had argued with Holm on 2 occasions during the voyage, once over the storage of Holm's carpentry tools, and once, more heatedly, over Holm's reluctance to assist with the ice drill deployment. Nyberg had refused Fisker's demand for extra rations on day 2 of the march, calling him a bully who mistakes volume for authority. I do not say that Fisker chose his victims for personal reasons. I do not know what was in his heart. I say only that 2 men were killed, that other men were equally infirm, and that the 2 who died were the 2 who had crossed Fisker. I record this and leave it to God. The chaplain saw it. The selection was not purely medical. It was not purely pragmatic. The men who died were the men who had made enemies of the man who decided who would die. 12 men walked onto the ice. The creature killed 2. The cold killed none. Fisker and Brandt killed 2. And the remaining 8, including 6 who said nothing, did nothing, stopped nothing, walked into the outpost and began building the lie that would hold for a century. The court-martial convened in Copenhagen on June 4th, 1903, 12 weeks after the survivors' return. It was closed. No press, no public gallery, no legal representation for the accused, because technically there were no accused. The Admiralty convened the proceeding as an investigative board of inquiry. rather than a formal court-martial, a procedural distinction that meant no charges would be filed, regardless of the findings. The outcome was decided before the first witness sat down. I have the transcript. It is 114 pages, handwritten, with the Admiralty seal on each page. It was declassified in 2003 alongside a batch of routine administrative records, and I do not think anyone in the archive realized what was in it. The folder was labeled Board of Inquiry, Loss of DSS Søkongen, 1903. It sounds like an insurance matter. The board consisted of 3 naval officers, Rear Admiral Henrik Trolle, Captain Wilhelm Stodge, and Commander Frederick Lund. Trolle presided. I note, because it matters, that Trolle was the same officer who had approved the Søkongen's equipment requisition, the drill, the winch, the specimen jars. He authorized the mission. He knew what the ship was sent to find. And now he was judging what happened after the finding went wrong. Fisker testified first. His testimony is remarkable for its lack of remorse. Not because Fisker was a monster. The transcript makes clear he was articulate, precise, and not without feeling, but because he had clearly rehearsed his justification to a diamond edge and intended to deliver it without deviation. I made a decision on the 4th night of the march. The decision was that 2 men who could not survive would be allowed to die quickly and painlessly rather than slowly and in agony, and that their remaining rations would be redistributed to the 8 men who could survive. I performed the arithmetic before making this decision. We had approximately 2 days of food remaining. At the pace set by the injured, we were 9 days from the outpost. Even redistributing Holm and Nyberg's rations to the group, we gained less than a full day's supply. But the pace increase unencumbered by the sledge and the need for assisted walking would gain us 3 days. The combination of additional rations and increased pace made survival probable instead of impossible. I do not use the word certain. I use the word probable. I made a decision under conditions of extreme duress in which the probable survival of 8 was weighed against the certain death of 2 and the probable death of all 10. I stand by the decision. The board asked, "Who performed the act?" Fisker. Brandt. On your order? On his own decision. I proposed the measure. Brandt volunteered to carry it out. No one was ordered. Did any member of the party object? No. Did you consider alternative measures, leaving the injured men with a share of rations and proceeding without them? I considered it. The injured would have died regardless. Leaving them conscious and alone on the ice to die over 2 or 3 days seemed to me a cruelty worse than what we did. I chose what I believed to be the lesser cruelty. Did you consult with First Mate Engström? No. Engström was occupied with the injured. I made the decision among those who were willing to hear it. You selected your audience. I selected the men I believed would understand the necessity. Brandt's testimony is shorter. He was asked fewer questions. He answered each one with the same flat affect that the court recorder noted parenthetically as speaks without visible emotion, gaze fixed on the table. Did you kill Holm and Nyberg? Yes. Describe how. I placed a folded blanket over each man's face while he slept and held it until he stopped breathing. Holm first, then Nyberg. I checked for pulse in both cases. There was none. Did they wake? Holm moved slightly. His hand came up, then it dropped. Nyberg did not move. Did you hesitate? A long pause is noted in the transcript. Then, I hesitated with Holm. Why? Because I knew him. That is all Brandt said on the subject. The board did not press further. The board also interviewed Vestergaard, Engström, and 2 other survivors, Lundgren and a sailor named Thorsen. Their testimonies are shorter and more guarded. Engström stated that he became aware of the deaths the following morning and understood the circumstances without being told. Lundgren said he was on watch during night 4 and heard nothing, a claim that Vestergaard's letter directly contradicts. Vestergaard places Lundgren awake and near the shelter. Thorsen said only that Decisions were made that I did not participate in and do not wish to discuss. The board deliberated for 2 hours. Their finding: the actions taken by Fisker and Brandt on the night of March 12, 1903, while regrettable and outside the bounds of standard military conduct, were undertaken in extremis, and with reasonable belief that the alternative was the death of all surviving party members. The board finds no basis for criminal charges. The board further recommends that the details of the incident be excluded from the public record to avoid distress to the families of the deceased and to prevent reputational damage to the Danish naval service. Excluded from the public record. But the board went further than exclusion. What they did next is the part I keep returning to, the part that feels less like bureaucracy and more like something deliberate and cold. The board did not erase Fisker and Brandt from the record. The killers remained listed as survivors, their names, their ranks, their service records all intact. Fisker served in the Navy for another 8 years. Brandt received an honorable discharge in 1905. The board erased Holm and Nyberg, not listed as deceased, not marked as killed during the march, removed entirely. Their names were struck from the crew manifest. Their next of kin files were transferred to a general lost at sea registry with no ship attribution. Their personnel records were annotated with a single code, NFS/03, which I have found in no other naval document and which appears to stand for No Further Status, 1903. NFS? No further status. As if they had simply ceased to exist, not as dead men, but as men who had never been. The logic is apparent once you see it. If Holm and Nyberg were never on the expedition, then they could not have been killed during the expedition. If they were never killed, there was no crime. If there was no crime, there was nothing to cover up. The Admiralty didn't protect the guilty by hiding the truth. They made the truth structurally impossible by deleting the victims. 14 men sailed. The official record shows 12. 2 men were erased, not from the list of the living, but from the list of the having ever been. And here is what makes Rear Admiral Trolla's involvement so much worse than ordinary institutional cowardice. Trolla approved the mission. He knew the Søkongen was sent to find the creature. He knew the drill, the dredges, the specimen jars were his requisition. He knew the crew was deliberately placed above a deep ocean trench where something massive had been reported by Inuit sources. He sent those men to that ice. Trolla didn't just cover up the murders. He covered up the reason the murders became possible. If the mission had been what the public brief said, as a routine hydrographic survey, the Søkongen would never have anchored over the trench. She would never have deployed the drill. The creature would never have attacked. Mikkelsen and Dahl would not have died. The walk would not have happened. Holm and Nyberg would have come home. The court-martial didn't protect Fisker and Brandt from justice. It protected the Admiralty from consequence. After the court-martial, the 8 survivors dispersed. Fisker remained in the Navy. Engstrom resigned his commission and took a position with a commercial shipping line. He died in 1934 without, as far as I can determine, ever speaking publicly about the Søkongen. Vestergaard returned to his parish, wrote his sealed testimony, and died in 1908. Lundgren emigrated to America in 1910 and is the source of the brief diary entry I quoted earlier. Thorsen, Fransen, Lindgren, and a sailor named Hald left behind no personal records that I have been able to locate. Fisker died in 1916 during the First World War, aboard a merchant vessel torpedoed in the North Sea. There is an irony there that I will not linger on, except to say that Fisker, who calculated the survival odds so precisely on the Greenland ice, died in water after all, which leaves Brandt, Peter Brandt, age 29 in 1903, the boatswain who whistled hymns and carried wildflower seeds in his sea chest, the man who gave Holm his gloves on the foredeck, the man who pulled Holm from the water on March 9th, the man who held a blanket over Holm's face on March 12th. Brandt received his honorable discharge in 1905. He returned to Jutland. He married in 1908, a woman named Katrine from a neighboring farm. They had 2 children. He took over his family's land and worked it quietly for the rest of his life. He attended church every Sunday. He kept a garden, a meticulous garden by all accounts. Flowers as well as vegetables, tended with an attention that neighbors described as almost penitential. He did not speak of Greenland. This is confirmed by family accounts, by the absence of any mention in local records, and by a single line in a letter from Katrina to her sister, dated 1932. Peter will not discuss his time at sea. I have stopped asking. There is a room in him that is locked, and I do not have the key, and I believe now that even he has lost it. But Brandt went back. Danish travel records passenger manifests for the steamship routes between Copenhagen and Greenland show that Peter Brandt traveled to Greenland 3 times after the expedition. Once in 1911, once in 1927, once in 1946, 3 years before his death. The 1911 trip coincides with no known personal or professional obligation. Neither does the 1927 trip. The 1946 trip, taken when Brandt was 72 years old and in declining health, required a doctor's clearance letter, which survives in his medical file and contains the physician's note. Patient insists on traveling despite advanced arthritis and cardiac irregularity. States the trip is necessary. I have advised against it in the strongest terms. Patient is resolute. What was in Greenland that a 72-year-old farmer needed to reach so badly that he defied his doctor to get there? Not the attack site. The Søkongen went down in the Scoresby Sund, in deep water beneath pack ice. There is nothing to visit. The ship is gone. The ice has moved and reformed 1,000 times since 1903. The trench is still there, but it is unmarked and unreachable without a vessel. Brandt did not go to the Scoresby Sund. He went to the ice shelf. I know this because of the map. Brandt died on October 3, 1949, at his home in Jutland. He was 75. Cause of death was cardiac arrest. He died in his garden, according to Katrina's account, sitting in a chair among the flower beds, wearing his old wool coat, the coat he'd worn at sea, heavy and salt-stained and decades out of fashion. Katrina said he wore it in the garden, even in summer. She thought it was sentimentality. Maybe it was. When the estate was settled, Katrina asked her eldest son to clean out Brandt's personal effects. In the cedar trunk at the foot of their bed, the trunk that had been Brandt's sea chest, repurposed for storage, the son found the following items: a ship's compass, engraved with the Søkongen's name, a leather pouch containing dried wildflower seeds, the same pouch listed in the 1903 manifest, still half full, a hand-drawn map on heavy paper, folded into quarters, showing a section of the East Greenland coast between the Scoresby Sund and Itakortormit. The map is crude, but precise distances are marked in nautical miles. Compass bearings are noted, and the coastline matches modern charts closely enough that Brandt must have drawn it from memory with considerable care. On the map, 2 locations are marked with X's. They are on the ice shelf, approximately 22 and 23 miles southeast of the Søkongen's last recorded position. They are roughly 4 days' walking distance from the wreck site. 4 days, night 4. The X marks are the graves. There is a third mark on the map, not an X, but a small circle, drawn at the position where the Søkongen went down. Brandt marked the creature too. He carried the whole story on a single sheet of paper. The ship, the thing that took it, the men he killed, all in his sea chest, all in his trunk, all in the bedroom he shared with his wife for 41 years. And the coat. When the sun went through the coat's pockets, the coat Brandt was wearing when he died. The coat he wore in the garden, the coat he wore to Greenland. 3 times he found a letter in the inside breast pocket. The letter was addressed to the family of Niels Holm, carpenter's mate. The address below the name was in Nakskov Holm's hometown, which Brandt must have looked up or remembered from the ship's manifest. The envelope was sealed. It had never been sent. The son opened it. I have a photocopy. The original is in a private collection. The letter is 2 pages, written in Brandt's hand, a careful, deliberate hand. The letters formed slowly, as if each word was weighed before it was committed to paper. It is dated March 15th, 1947, 2 years before Brandt's death and 1 year after his final trip to Greenland. I will transcribe it in full. It has waited long enough. To the family of Niels Holm, my name is Peter Brandt. I served with your Niels on the Danish icebreaker Søkongen during the 1903 Greenland expedition. You were told that Niels died when the ship was lost to ice. This is not true. I am writing to tell you what is true, because I owe it to Niels, and I owe it to you, and I've owed it for 44 years. Niels survived the loss of the ship. I pulled him from the water myself. He was injured, his hand and feet were frozen, but he was alive, and he was brave, and he did not complain. He walked for 4 days on feet that must have been agony. He did not slow us as much as you might think. He tried very hard. On the 4th night, I killed him. I held a blanket over his face while he slept. I did this because another man told me it was necessary, and because I believed him, and because I was afraid that if I did not act, we would all die on that ice. I believed I was choosing 8 lives over 2. I believed the arithmetic was sound. I believed it for many years. I do not believe it anymore. I think about Niels often. I think about his hands. He had a carpenter's hands, quick, sure, always moving. I think about the day I gave him my gloves on the foredeck because his were wet and his fingers were blue. And he thanked me with such surprise, as if no one had done him a kindness in a long time. I think about pulling him from the water and feeling his weight on my arms and being glad, truly glad, that I'd been strong enough to save him. I think about the sound he made when the blanket covered his face. A small sound, not a scream, almost a question. I have gone back to the place where we buried him 3 times. It is on the ice shelf, 22 miles southeast of where the ship went down. I marked it on a map. The ice has changed, it shifts, it breaks, it reforms, and I cannot be certain I have stood in the right place. But I have stood as close as I can. I brought flowers. They are from my garden. They are the same kind that grow in the meadow behind our house in Jutland, the same seeds I carried on the ship. I don't know if Niels would have cared for flowers. I don't know what he would have cared for. I didn't know him well enough. I knew him for 19 days. That is how long the whole expedition lasted, from the time he joined the crew to the night I killed him. 19 days. It was not enough time to know a man. It was enough time to end one. I am sorry. I know that this word is not enough. I know that nothing I write in this letter is enough. I know that you may hate me, and I would not blame you. I would only ask you to know that Niels was brave, that he did not suffer long, and that someone has visited his grave, and will visit it as long as I am able. I am old now, and I do not think I will go back to Greenland again. But the map is in my trunk. If someday someone wants to look for him, the marks are there. I'm sorry. Peter Brandt. The letter was written in 1947. Brandt died in 1949. For 2 years, this letter sat in the breast pocket of his coat, the coat he wore every day, in the garden, in the house, in the chair where he died, pressed against his chest, sealed, addressed, stamped, ready to send. He never sent it. I have thought about this for a long time, longer than I have thought about the creature, longer than I have thought about the Admiralty, longer than I have thought about any other part of this story. Why didn't he send it? I think he wrote it as a promise to himself. I think he intended to mail it. I think he walked to the post office in his village and stood outside it and could not go in. And I think he walked home and put the letter back in his coat and told himself tomorrow, and then told himself tomorrow again, and then told himself next week, and then told himself before I die. And then he died in his garden in the autumn sun, with the letter still against his heart. The son, Brandt's son, did not know what the letter meant. He had never heard of home. He had never heard of the Søkongen. He put the letter back in the trunk with the map and the compass and the seeds, and the trunk sat in an attic in Jutland for another 50 years until an estate sale in 2001 dispersed its contents. The map went to a maritime antiquities dealer in Copenhagen. The compass went to a private collector. The seeds, the wildflower seeds that Brandt carried to Greenland in 1903 and back, Hasanas, and carried to Greenland 3 more times, and kept in his trunk for 46 years, were thrown away. No one knew what they were. The letter ended up in the hands of a historian at the Danish Maritime Museum who recognized the name Søkongen and contacted the Naval Archive. That is how the letter connected to the declassified court-martial transcript. That is how the story surfaced. That is how I found it. And there is one more thing in Brandt's papers. One document I have not yet mentioned, because I did not understand its significance until I had read everything else. In the cedar trunk, beneath the map and the compass and the seed pouch, there was a second letter. This one was not addressed to the Holm family. It was addressed to the Danish Naval Archive, Admiralty Records Division, Copenhagen. It was dated 1905, the year of Brandt's discharge. It reads, "To the Keeper of Records, I am writing to request that my name be removed from the official survivor list of the 1903 Søkongen expedition. I do not wish to be recorded as a survivor. I do not wish to be counted among the living of that voyage. Please remove my name as you have removed the others. Peter Brandt, former bosun, DSS Søkongen." He asked to be erased, not as punishment, not as protest. He wanted his name taken off the list because he did not believe he deserved to be on it. He did not believe that a man who had done what he did should be counted among those who survived. The others, Holm. Nyberg had been erased because the Admiralty wanted to hide a crime. Brandt wanted to be erased because he wanted to hide from himself. The Admiralty obliged. They removed his name, but not for his reasons. They removed him because a survivor list of 8, when the public story claimed the sinking killed 8, would have raised questions. Reducing the list to 6 made the arithmetic clean. 14 crew minus 8 dead in the sinking equals 6 survivors. No walk, no night 4, no murder, no questions. Brandt wanted absolution. The Admiralty wanted bookkeeping. They erased the same name for entirely different reasons, and the effect was the same. Peter Brandt, the man who pulled Holm from the water and then held a blanket over his face, ceased to exist in the official history of the Søkongen. He became no one. He tended his garden, visited his graves, carried his letter, and died as if he had never sailed. The Admiralty got what it wanted. Whether Brandt got what he wanted, I cannot say. I need to return to the creature, not because the human story is insufficient. It is, I think, the most important part of this account, the part that will endure, the part that should disturb, but because the creature is still there. The Kraken, the Umjarswaluk, the thing that started all of this by rising through the ice and pulling a ship into the dark. The human horror grew from the creature's action, like infection from a wound, and the wound has not closed. In 2004, a joint Danish-Norwegian geological survey vessel, the R/V Porsild, conducted a multi-beam sonar mapping operation in the Scoresby Sund as part of an ongoing continental shelf delineation project. The survey was routine mapping seafloor topography to support Denmark's territorial claims under the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea. The Porsild spent 3 weeks in the strait, running systematic transects, collecting bathymetric data. On the 14th day, during a transect over the subglacial trench, the same trench the Søkongen anchored above, the same trench where Lindgren lowered his specimen dredge, the same trench where something knocked 3x3 on an iron hull, the sonar operator flagged an anomaly. The official survey report, which I obtained through a Freedom of Information request to the Danish Geological Survey, describes the contact in technical language. Transect 14-C, 1347 UTC. Sonar returned consistent with a large biological target at 1,200 meters depth within the axial channel of the Scoresby Trench. Target dimensions estimated at 25 to 30 meters in length. Target exhibited lateral movement during the observation window, approximately 4 minutes, inconsistent with current drift or instrument artifact. Contact was not reacquired on subsequent transects. 25 to 30 meters, 80 to 100 feet. Moving. At 1,200 meters, nearly 4,000 feet of depth in a trench beneath the Arctic ice. The sonar operator's name is redacted in the report, but I located him through the Porsilt's crew records. He is retired now, living in Bergen. He agreed to speak with me on condition of anonymity. He told me the following. I've been operating sonar for 22 years. I know what a whale looks like on the screen. I know what a school of fish looks like. I know what a temperature inversion artifact looks like. This was none of those. It was a single, solid return, dense, well-defined edges, consistent shape. It was biological. And it was big. Not whale big. Bigger. The shape was wrong for a whale, too broad, too flat, with extensions on the margins. Tentacles, maybe. I don't know. I reported it to the chief scientist. He looked at the data. He told me to flag it and move on. I flagged it. What happened to the flag? Nothing. It went into the survey data with everything else. The report classified it as unidentified biological target and recommended follow-up investigation. As far as I know, no follow-up was ever conducted. Why not? Above my pay grade. But I'll tell you this, about 2 weeks after we filed the survey data, I got a call from someone at the Admiralty. Not the Geological Survey. The Admiralty. Naval Intelligence Division. They asked me exactly 3 questions. The coordinates of the contact, the duration of the observation, and whether I had retained any personal copies of the sonar data. I said no. They said thank you. I never heard from them again. The Danish Admiralty. The same institution that sealed the Søkongen file. The same institution that erased Holm and Nyberg. The same institution that convened a sham court-martial to protect its own complicity. 101 years later, still managing the same secret. Still keeping the trench quiet. I requested the raw sonar data for Transect 14-C under the Freedom of Information Act. The request was denied. The stated reason: the requested data has been transferred to a restricted classification under national security provisions and is not available for public release. National security. A sonar contact with an animal, a living thing, a cephalopod, an organism, is classified under national security. I do not know what is in that trench. I know what the 1903 crew saw. I know what the 2004 sonar detected. I know that the Inuit of the Scoresby Sund region have stories going back generations about something that lives beneath the ice and takes boats. And I know that those stories contain behavioral details. The 3-knock warning, the 4-night escalation that match the Søkongen crew's experience with a precision that independent invention cannot explain. I know that the ice in the Scoresby Sund is thinner now than it was in 1903. 40% thinner, according to Danish Meteorological Institute data. The membrane between the surface and whatever lives below is eroding, year by year, degree by degree. And I know that in 1903, a creature that could have killed 12 men chose to kill 2 and let the rest walk away. And that those men, freed from the monster, became monsters themselves within 4 days. I keep coming back to a comparison that I cannot escape, no matter how many times I try to reason my way out of it. The Kraken took 4 minutes. In those 4 minutes, it killed 2 men, both of whom were physically connected to the machinery that had been driven into its territory, into what may have been its home. It destroyed the ship. It destroyed the equipment. It did not pursue the survivors. It did not kill indiscriminately. Its violence, as terrible as it was, had a logic to it, territorial, defensive, targeted. It stopped when the threat was neutralized. If you can call the destruction of a ship and 2 human lives restrained, then the creature was restrained. Fisker's decision took 8 days to germinate and 1 night to execute. It killed 2 men, both of whom were helpless, sleeping, and trusting the men around them to keep them alive. The selection was influenced, at minimum, by personal animosity. The 6 men who neither acted nor objected became complicit through silence. The institution that investigated became complicit through erasure. The violence had no territorial logic, no defensive purpose. It had only arithmetic. And the arithmetic, as Vestergaard noted, did not hold up to scrutiny. Other men were equally infirm and were not touched. The creature killed out of something we might, if we are generous, call instinct. The men killed out of something they called reason. I am no longer certain which is more frightening. The Umiar is still in the trench. The sonar says so. The ice says so. The Inuit stories, which have proven accurate in every verifiable detail, say so. It is old, and it is vast, and it is patient. And it has been there longer than any ship, any nation, any record. The men are gone. Fisker, Brandt, Engstrom, Vestergaard, Holm, Nyberg, Mikkelsen, Dahl, all of them. Bones in the earth, or bones on the ice, or bones in the deep water. Gone. But what they did to each other is not gone. It is in the archive. It is in the chaplain's letter. It is in the court-martial transcript. It is in a hand-drawn map with 2 X marks on ice that has long since broken and reformed and broken again. It is in a letter that was never sent, carried in a coat pocket against a man's chest for 2 years, and buried with him. I went to Greenland. I did not plan to. The research was done. The documents were collected, cross-referenced, and verified. The story was complete. I had Vestergaard's letter, Brandt's letter, the court-martial transcript, the sonar data, the Inuit oral histories. I had everything I needed to write this account. There was no evidentiary reason to go. I went anyway. I flew to Itakortormiit, the same outpost where 8 men stumbled in from the ice on March 17, 1903. It is a small town now. Brightly painted houses on a rocky coast, about 350 people. The ice in the strait was thinner than I expected. Open water was visible from the shore, dark leads running through the pack, patches of black sea where, a century ago, there would have been solid ice for miles. I stood on the coast and looked northeast, toward the Scoresby Sund, toward the place where the trench lies hidden beneath the surface. I could not see it. There was nothing to see. Ice and water and sky, the same in every direction, the same as it has been for thousands of years. The same as it was on the morning 12 men stood in the pale light and watched a Danish flag sink beneath a hole in the world. An elder in the town, not a direct descendant of Jorund, the interpreter, but from a family with long roots in the settlement, agreed to speak with me. I asked him about the Umiar. He nodded, unsurprised. He told me the story the way his grandmother told it. The creature lives in the deep place. It has always lived there. It does not come to the surface unless something disturbs it. The old rule is simple: do not anchor over the deep place. Do not put machines into the water. Do not knock on the floor of its house. The Danes came with their ship and their drill, he said. They knocked on its floor. It answered. I asked if people still follow the old rules. He looked at me with an expression I could not entirely read. Patience, maybe, or resignation, or something older than either. The ice is thinner, he said. The water is warmer. There are more ships now, bigger ships, louder machines. The old rules say do not knock on its floor. He paused. Now everyone is knocking, all the time, and it is listening. I asked him one more question. I asked if he had heard of Brandt, of the men who walked across the ice, and he said, my grandmother said 8 men came to the outpost. 2 of them had something wrong behind their eyes. She said they looked like men who had swallowed something they could not digest. She did not know what it was. She was a child. She remembered the look. Something wrong behind their eyes. Something they had swallowed and could not digest. I think about Brandt in his garden. The flowers, the seeds, the pressed wildflowers in his books. Not a hobby, I understand now, but a practice, a ritual. Growing the things he would carry across the Atlantic to lay on ice that had swallowed the man whose life he saved and then took. Tending life because he had ended it. Growing flowers because he could not undo what his hands had done. But he could make his hands do something else. Something gentle. Something that would live instead of die. I think about the letter in his pocket. The weight of it. Not heavy. Few sheets of paper, an envelope, a stamp. Nothing. Almost nothing. And yet he carried it for 2 years and could not set it down. Could not send it. Could not throw it away. Could not put it in a drawer or burn it or leave it at the post office. He kept it against his chest. He wore the weight. I think about home. 26 years old. Good with his hands. On his first Arctic voyage. A last-minute replacement. Not supposed to be there at all. Survived a sea monster. Survived the freezing water. Walked on frozen feet for 4 days without complaint. Or at least without enough complaint to save his life. Fell asleep on night 4, trusting the men around him. Made a small sound, almost a question, and then was gone. 19 days. That is how long home existed in the world of the Søkongen. 19 days from manifest to murder. It was not enough time to know a man. It was enough time to end one. And I think about the creature, down in the trench, in the dark and the cold and the pressure, at a depth where the weight of the ocean would crush a human body like paper. Alive, old, patient, wrapped around itself in the deep place, in its house, where the knocking comes through the ice and the drills bite down, and the ships send their engine heartbeats through the water like invitations. The Kraken took 4 minutes. The men took 8 days. The Admiralty took 100 years. The ice took everything else. The ship, the bodies, the graves, the flowers Brandt laid on the surface carried from Denmark, placed on the ice, swallowed by wind and melt and time. Gone. All of it gone. But not the letter. The letter survived. Pressed in a coat, folded in a trunk, auctioned in an estate sale. Delivered finally to someone who could read it and understand what it meant. 100 years late. Addressed to a family that never received it. Written by a man who could not mail it. Containing the truth about a night on the ice that the Danish government erased. That the survivors buried. That the chaplain sealed behind God's authority. And that a boatswain from Jutland carried against his heart until the heart stopped. I do not know if Holmes' family still exists. I have looked. The surname is common in Denmark. The address in Nakskov has changed hands many times. The trail is cold, but I will keep looking, because Brandt could not send the letter, and someone should, and because the ice is thinner now. The trench is still there. The creature is still there. The old rules still apply. Do not knock on its floor. Do not anchor over the deep place. Do not bring your machines into its house. But the floor is thinner every year, and the machines are louder every year. And no one is listening to the old rules because no one believes the old stories, because the Admiralty made sure of that a century ago. The Umiarsualuk has been patient. I wonder how much longer it will be. The last thing I did in Greenland was walk to the shore at low tide. The ice edge was close 50 yards out, maybe less. I could hear it. Not the knocking. Not the 3x3 rhythm that Engstrom logged and the Inuit described, and the Søkongen's crew ignored at the cost of everything. Just the ice. Creaking, shifting, breathing almost. The ordinary sound of a frozen sea adjusting to currents and temperature and the slow, planetary fact of warming. But beneath the ordinary sound, if I listened and I listened, I stood there for 20 minutes in the wind and the cold, and I listened. There was something else. a low vibration, not quite a sound, more like a pressure in the ears, a thickness in the air, a sense that the water beneath the ice was not empty, that it was occupied, that something down there was aware of the shore and the town and the man standing on the rocks, and it was not alarmed, and it was not hungry, and it was not angry. It was listening, the way it listened between the knocks. I left Greenland the next morning. I did not sleep that night, not because I was afraid of the creature, though I was, and I am. And I think anyone who reads the full account and does not feel afraid is not paying attention. I could not sleep because of the letter, because Pedro Brandt wrote the truest thing he ever wrote, sealed it in an envelope, addressed it to the people who deserved to read it, and then could not make himself walk to the post office and let it go. For 2 years, 730 days, he put on his coat every morning and felt the letter in the pocket and told himself today, and then did not, and then told himself tomorrow, and then did not. And then he sat down in his garden among the flowers he had grown for a dead man, and his heart stopped, and the letter was still there. That is the part that haunts me, not the Kraken. The Kraken is an animal, ancient, enormous, terrifying, but an animal, acting on instinct or intelligence or something between the two, protecting its territory, enforcing a boundary that the Søkongen crossed. The Kraken can be understood, feared, but understood. What I cannot understand, what I do not think I will ever understand, is the distance between a man's pocket and a post box. The distance between I am sorry and the act of saying it to the people who need to hear it. The distance between writing the truth and sending it. Brandt crossed the Atlantic 3 times to visit a grave on the ice. He could not cross a village street to mail a letter. The creature in the trench is vast and old and patient, and it has survived for centuries in the dark, and it will survive the thinning of the ice and the warming of the water and whatever comes next, because it was here before the ships, and it will be here after. But the creature in Brandt, the guilt, the grief, the 2-year letter, the flowers on the ice, that creature is human. And it is the one I cannot stop thinking about. 14 men sailed on the Søkongen. 2 were taken by the sea. 2 were taken by their own. The rest were taken by the silence that followed. And beneath all of it, beneath the ice, beneath the archive, beneath the chaplain's letter and the court-martial and the map with its X marks and the coat with its unsent confession, the deep place endures. The knocking has stopped for now. But the old rule holds. Do not anchor over the trench. Do not put machines into the water. Do not knock on the floor of its house. And if you hear the knocking back, 3 by 3, in the dark, patient and measured and waiting, count the nights.